Mark Bennett had never been the kind of man who made a scene, not even when life gave him enough reasons to. At 52, he carried his emotions the way he carried everything else, carefully, quietly, and with a kind of steady patience that people often admired but rarely understood. He wasn't emotionless. He simply believed that love, real love, didn't always need noise. Sometimes it lived in the silent things: a warm cup of coffee left on the counter, a hand squeezed during a difficult moment, a soft smile offered across a crowded room. But on this particular evening, as he stood in front of the bedroom mirror adjusting his collar for the 5th time, Mark felt something heavy in his chest. Not sadness exactly, more like a quiet ache, one that had been growing for months, maybe years, without him fully noticing. It was the kind of ache a person only felt when they cared deeply, so deeply that even the smallest shift in the air felt like a sign. Tonight was his 20th wedding anniversary with his wife, Emily. 20 years. 2 decades of arguments, laughter, routines, comfort, and memories that felt woven into his DNA. And yet, as he looked at himself in the mirror, he felt strangely disconnected from the man staring back. He pressed his palm against the dresser, trying to steady himself. "You're overthinking," he murmured, though the words did little to quiet the feeling. Mark wasn't naive. He had sensed Emily drifting slowly, quietly, the way a person pulls their hand away without meaning to. She still smiled at him, still cooked his favorite meals on Sundays, still held conversations about work and errands and the small details of daily life. But something deeper had shifted. Her laughter didn't linger as long. Her eyes didn't light up the way they once did. And often when she looked at him, there was a sadness she tried to hide. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was life. Maybe it was simply the way time changed people. But tonight, Mark hoped, prayed that their anniversary dinner would be a turning point. Emily had chosen the restaurant, the same one where he had proposed 22 years ago, when the world felt like a promise instead of a question. He remembered that night with clarity. The dim lights, the quiet music, the way Emily's cheeks flushed when he slipped the ring out of his pocket. She had said yes so fast he'd barely finished the question. They had been young, hopeful, and full of dreams that didn't yet know the weight of real life. Now here they were, 2 decades later, carrying not just dreams, but mistakes, disappointments, unspoken fears, and unhealed places within themselves. Mark put on his jacket and walked toward the living room. Emily wasn't ready yet, but he could hear her moving around upstairs, the soft hum of a hairdryer, the quiet click of a makeup brush against the counter. She took longer to get ready lately, not out of vanity, but out of something else, something he couldn't name. He walked to the bookshelf and traced his finger along the frame's photos of vacations, family gatherings, holidays, ordinary moments frozen in time. Emily's smile in each one was bright, full, effortless. He wondered when that brightness had begun to dim. A knock at the window startled him. Their neighbor's teenage son waved as he jogged past. Mark waved back automatically, but felt the weight return as soon as the moment passed. He wasn't lonely, not really. He had Emily. He had a good job, a quiet home, a stable life. But loneliness wasn't always about being alone. Sometimes it was about feeling unseen in the place where you should feel most understood. And that was the part that scared him. He sat on the edge of the couch, exhaling slowly. 20 years, he whispered. Don't fall apart now. A soft set of footsteps approached from the stairs. Mark looked up. Emily stood at the bottom step, wearing a navy dress that shimmered when she moved. Her hair fell gently over her shoulders, and her eyes those blue, thoughtful eyes he had always loved held a mixture of warmth and something he couldn't decipher. You look beautiful, he said quietly. Emily smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. You ready? She asked. Mark nodded and grabbed his keys. They stepped outside into the cool evening air, a breeze carrying the faint scent of pine trees and distant rain. Emily wrapped her arms around herself against the chill, and without thinking, Mark removed his jacket and placed it gently over her shoulders. She hesitated before accepting it, offering a small, grateful nod as he opened the car door for her. Mark felt something shift in intuition, subtle but sharp. telling him that tonight would not be the evening he expected. Something waited for them at that table at the old restaurant. Something Emily had been carrying, holding tight, hiding beneath her quiet smiles and longer than usual silences. And for the first time in years, Mark felt a flicker of fear. He didn't know it yet. But Emily had a plan, and it was about to change everything. The drive to the restaurant was quiet, almost too quiet, like a pause between heartbeats. Street lights washed the car in soft yellow as they passed through familiar parts of the town. Each corner carrying a memory Mark wasn't sure Emily still held on to. He glanced at her from time to time. She sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes focused on the road ahead. The navy dress shimmered faintly whenever they passed a streetlight. But her expression remained unreadable. Mark cleared his throat gently. "Do you remember the first time we came to this restaurant?" he asked. Emily turned her head, her lips forming a faint, wistful smile. "Of course I remember. You spilled water all over the table because your hands were shaking." He chuckled softly. "I was nervous. I'd spent the whole week trying to find the right moment to ask you out. You tripped over your words," she added gently. "I did. More than once." The memory warmed him, filling the space between them with a kind of soft nostalgia. Back then, everything had been simple. Their feelings had been loud, clear, impossible to hide. Mark remembered the way Emily laughed fully, brightly, as though nothing could dim her happiness. He remembered how her hand fit in his, how she used to lean into him during their walks. Not because she needed support, but because closeness felt natural as they approached a red light. Mark's eyes drifted toward a bakery on the corner, its warm glow spilling out onto the sidewalk. "That's where we used to buy those little lemon pastries," he said. Emily followed his gaze and nodded softly. "You always insisted on getting to, even though I could never finish mine." "I needed an excuse to stay longer," he admitted. Her eyes softened for a brief moment. Those were good days. They were more than good, he thought. They were the days that built them, the days when love felt like a promise made of light. Instead of something fragile and complicated, the light turned green, and they continued toward the restaurant. They arrived to find the place almost exactly as it had been years ago. Soft lighting, warm wooden decor, the faint sound of quiet jazz playing overhead. A young hostess greeted them with a smile and led them to a table near the window, the same table where Mark had once held a ring beneath the napkin. Waiting for the right moment as they sat down, Emily traced her finger along the edge of the menu, her movements slow, thoughtful. A wave of tenderness washed over Mark as he watched her. "You used to draw little hearts on the napkins," he said softly, "every time we came here." Emily looked up, surprised. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," he replied. She lowered her eyes again, but he saw something flicker across her expressions, something like guilt. Or maybe longing. The waiter arrived to take their drink orders, and once he left, silence returned. Not awkward, but heavy. Mark decided to try again, to reconnect through the memories that still mattered to him. "Do you remember our first road trip?" he asked. A smile flickered on her lips. "The one where you got us lost for 3 hours. I maintain the map was outdated," he said, laughing softly. "You refused to ask for directions. I was trying to impress you." Emily finally let out a gentle laugh, the kind that sounded almost like the old days. "You did impress me," she said quietly. "More than you knew." The warmth of her words settled into his chest. For a brief moment, the years between then and now seemed to dissolve. But just as quickly, the expression on her face changed again. The laughter faded, replaced by something more serious, more fragile. Mark watched her carefully. "What happened to us, Em?" he asked in a low voice. "We used to talk about everything." Emily inhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the edge of her napkin. "Life happened, Mark. Responsibilities, stress, time. They pile up, and sometimes, without meaning to, people drift." "Did we drift?" he asked gently. "Or did we stop reaching for each other?" Emily looked out the window instead of answering. The old memories hung between them, warm and bright. but shadowed by the years that came after. Mark thought of all the small things he missed. The late-night talks, the long drives with no destination, the way Emily used to rest her head on his shoulder while they watched old movies. He missed the connection that had made everything feel easy, and he wasn't sure when or why they had let it slip away. Emily finally turned back to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mark, do you remember the night we moved into our first apartment?" He smiled. "Of course. We had one lamp, two folding chairs, and a mattress on the floor. And we were so excited," she said, a tear forming at the corner of her eye. "We had nothing, but it felt like everything." Mark reached across the table, slowly giving her room to pull away. She didn't. He placed his hand gently over hers. "Those moments still mean everything to me," he said softly. A gentle breeze drifted through the restaurant as the waiter opened the side door to let in the cool night air. The curtains shifted softly, bringing with them the faint scent of rain. Something about the moment felt symbolic, like the world outside had paused, waiting for whatever Emily was about to say. Mark didn't move. His hand remained over hers on the table, warm, steady, patient. He didn't want to rush her. Emily's eyes shimmered with uncertainty, and for a second, she looked like the younger version of herself, the girl who used to get nervous about things she cared too deeply about. "Mark," she began, her voice quiet but clear, "I didn't plan to tell you this tonight, not exactly. But something happened this week that made me realize I can't keep carrying it alone." He held his breath. "What happened?" Emily inhaled deeply, as though gathering courage piece by piece. "2 days ago," she said, "I found something in the attic while looking for our old photo albums." Mark frowned slightly. "What did you find?" She reached into her purse and set a small folded paper on the table, creased, familiar in a way he couldn't quite place. "I found this," she whispered. Mark picked it up carefully, unfolding it as though it might tear under the weight of his fingertips. His eyes traced the handwriting, hers, unmistakably hers. It was a note, but not the one from their 10th anniversary. This one was older, much older. Mark's breath hitched as he recognized the date at the top, the week before their wedding. He looked up, his confusion even deeper. "Emily, what is this?" She swallowed hard. "A letter I wrote to you, but never gave." Mark read the trembling words. "Mark, I'm scared. I'm scared to begin this life with you because I don't want to ruin the best thing that's ever happened to me. I don't know if I'm ready to be someone's forever, but I love you more than my fear." The lines blurred for a moment as he tried to wrap his mind around it. "I never saw this," he said softly. "I know," she replied. "I hid it. When I found it again, all those memories came rushing back. The doubts, the fears, the hopes, everything." Mark folded the letter again, setting it gently on the table. He didn't feel hurt. Not yet. More than anything, he felt curious, even concerned. "What made you write something like this back then?" he asked. Emily looked out the window, watching the streetlights streak across the glass as the wind picked up. "I was scared of disappointing you," she said. "You were certain about us from the beginning. You always moved with such confidence, like you knew we were meant to be. But I've always been the one who questions things, even the things I love most." Mark softened. "Emily, fear doesn't erase love." She met his gaze with a trembling smile. "I know, and for years I put that fear away. We built a life together, a good one. But somewhere along the line, the fear shifted. It became less about disappointing you and more about losing you." He opened his mouth to respond, but at that moment, something unexpected happened, something small, almost too ordinary to be significant, yet powerful nonetheless. A couple across the room began laughing, soft, warm laughter that filled the space like a melody. They were younger, probably in their late 20s. The woman rested her head on the man's shoulder as he whispered something to her, and she smiled in a way that made her eyes glow. Emily stared at them for a long moment. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Mark followed her gaze. "Yeah, that used to be us," she said, quietly, not with bitterness, but with a wistful ache. That closeness, that ease. It's the way they look at each other, like the world is small and simple. Mark felt something shift inside him, something like longing, but also recognition. Emily wasn't just grieving what was lost, she was remembering what was still possible. He leaned slightly closer. "We can have that again?" Emily looked at him, really looked at him, as though seeing him through a different lens, older, wiser. But still the man she had once chosen without hesitation. "I want to believe that," she whispered just then. As if fate felt the weight of her words. The waiter returned with 2 plate steaming dishes they had ordered years ago, without knowing this meal would echo the past. "Your favorites," the waiter said, placing them gently on the table. Emily blinked. How did he know? Mark smiled softly. "I called ahead." Her expression softened, surprised, touched, and something else. Something that made her eyes warm again. "You remembered what I used to order?" she asked. "I never forgot." A fragile silence followed, fragile, but not heavy. It felt like something healing, like a bridge forming between 2 distant hearts. Emily's shoulders relaxed. She breathed easier. And then slowly she reached across the table and took Mark's hand on her own, not out of obligation, but out of choice. "Mark," she whispered, "finding that letter scared me at first. But then I realized something. I still love you. I never stopped. I just forgot how to show it." The words hit him with a quiet force, gentle, honest, and unexpectedly hopeful. "Emily," he replied, squeezing her hand, "maybe tonight is the beginning of us learning again." She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Outside, the first drops of rain tapped lightly against the window, a soft reminder that sometimes the world needs a storm to feel new again. And inside, something in their marriage began to stir back to life. The rain grew steadier outside, tapping against the window in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Inside the restaurant, the dim lights softened the edges of the room, making everything feel a little more intimate, a little more fragile. Mark and Emily sat with their hands still joined. The warmth between their palms a reminder that some connections never truly faded. They simply slipped beneath the surface, waiting to be felt again. Emily's gaze lingered on their intertwined fingers. It had been so long since she'd reached for him first. The gesture alone felt like a confession. For a moment they didn't speak. They simply sat in the quiet that held more truth than any words they'd shared in years. Finally, Mark let out a slow, steady breath. "You said you forgot how to show it," he said quietly. "The love, the closeness." He paused, searching her expression. "What happened, Emily?" Emily withdrew her hand gently, not to create distance, but to gather herself. She folded her napkin slowly, smoothing the fabric again and again as she tried to find the courage to speak. "It wasn't one moment," she finally said. "It was everything happening little by little." Her voice trembled slightly. "I think I was afraid to tell you how much I needed help. How overwhelmed I felt. How tired I was of pretending to be strong." Mark's chest tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "'Cause you always seemed so sure," Emily whispered. "So steady. Like you never doubted us. And I didn't want to add my fears to your shoulders." He shook his head softly. "Emily, I would have carried anything with you." She blinked back, the sting in her eyes. "I know. But somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that admitting weakness meant I'd disappoint you. So I hid it." "How?" "And the longer I hid it, the harder it became to reach for you." Her words hit with the quiet weight of something long overdue. Mark leaned forward slightly. "I wasn't as sure as you thought," he said. "There were nights I lay awake, wondering if you still saw me the same way you once did. But I didn't want to overwhelm you either." Emily's breath caught, surprise flickering across her face. "You felt that too?" "I've felt it for years," he admitted. "But I didn't want to make things harder. Kept choosing silence to protect each other. It ended up hurting us instead." A single tear slid down Emily's cheek, but she wiped it away quickly. Not out of embarrassment, she simply wanted to stay present, focused, open. "You know what I regret the most?" she asked softly. Mark shook his head. "What?" "That I stopped telling you how much you meant to me," she said. "I kept waiting for the perfect moment to explain how lost I felt, but the perfect moment never came." He reached across the table again, slower this time, giving her space to accept or refuse the comfort. She lifted her hand and placed it gently in his. There it was again, that familiar warmth. A reminder of the early days, when touching each other felt like a natural extension of breathing. Emily continued. "When I found that old letter," she whispered, "I realized I've been carrying fears since the beginning. I loved you so much that I was terrified of failing you." "And I never told you that." Mark's voice softened. "Emily, loving someone doesn't mean you can't be afraid." She looked at him with a trembling smile. "But I thought if I admitted my fears, they would break what we had." "They wouldn't have," he said gently. "They still won't." Another silence settled between them, different from the earlier one. This silence wasn't heavy. It was full of everything they were finally letting themselves feel. Outside, the rain softened, as though the world itself was listening. Emily took a slow breath, her voice steadying as she finally spoke the words that had lived inside her for far too long. "The truth is, I never stopped loving you, Mark. Not once. Even during the moments when I felt far away. Even when I didn't know how to say what was hurting. The love never left. I just didn't know how to reach you through the noise of everything else." Mark's throat tightened. "I wish you'd told me sooner." "I wish I had too," she said, "but I'm telling you now." Her honesty settled into the space between them like a fragile gift, beautiful, delicate, and long awaited. Mark reached up and gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so simple, yet filled with years of unspoken affection. "Emily," he said, "there's something I haven't told you either." She looked at him. "Sir?" The restaurant had grown quieter as the evening wore on. Most of the tables were now empty, the soft murmur of conversation replaced by the gentle clinking of dishes being cleared in the distance. The rain outside had faded to a light drizzle, tapping lightly against the windows as if echoing the quiet rhythm of two hearts finally beginning to speak. For a long moment, Mark and Emily simply sat with the weight of their earlier words resting between them. Not a heavy weight, more like a fragile truth, waiting for its next breath. Emily brushed her fingertips across the edge of her water glass. "You said you planned this evening because you were afraid we'd drift too far apart." Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried something deeper. "Were you really that worried?" Mark held her gaze. "Yes," he said softly, "more than I ever let myself say out loud." Emily looked down, absorbing his words like someone listening to a truth they weren't prepared for. "I didn't know," she whispered. "That's my fault too," Mark replied. "I thought staying quiet would protect us. I thought giving you space would help. But instead, it made me feel farther away from you." He paused, choosing his next words with care. "I've been losing sleep for months, wondering if we were becoming strangers. Wondering if one day you'd just stop choosing us." Emily's head snapped up. "Mark, I would never. I know you wouldn't," he said gently. "Not intentionally. But distance doesn't always come from decisions. Sometimes it grows in the quiet places, the unspoken places." She swallowed hard. "That's exactly what scared me. I didn't want my fears to push you away. And I didn't want my fears to pressure you," he said. For the first time, they both realized how similar their wounds truly were. Emily leaned back slightly, her breath unsteady. "Then this dinner was your way of trying to reach me?" "Yes," Mark said. "But that's not all." Emily's brows furrowed. Waiting. Mark exhaled slowly, bracing himself. "There's something I've been meaning to tell you," he said. "Something I've kept inside because I didn't want to make things worse." Her heart dipped. "Mark, what is it?" He hesitated. Not because he didn't trust her, but because the words carried years of quiet ache. "You remember last spring," he began, "when you were staying late at work a lot? When you were tired all the time and barely spoke during dinner? Yes, she said carefully. That was a stressful time. I thought you understood. I did, he said gently. But I also noticed something else. Something I didn't know how to talk about. Emily's breath caught. What did you notice? Mark's voice softened as if he were trying not to alarm her. You stopped looking at me? Emily stared at him, startled. Looking at you, he nodded. Not just glancing. Really looking. The way you used to. Like I mattered. Like you were happy to see me walk into the room. Okay. Her chest tightened. Mark, I didn't know I'd changed. Neither did I, he said. Not at first. But then I realized every time you came home, you went straight upstairs. Every morning, you left without saying goodbye. Every weekend, you buried yourself in chores or errands. And I kept telling myself you were just tired. Just overwhelmed. Emily closed her eyes, a tear escaping despite her best effort. I was tired. I was overwhelmed. But I never meant to push you away. I know you didn't, Mark said quietly. But the day I realized you hadn't really looked at me in months, that's when I got scared. That's when I felt something inside me shift. Emily reached for him instinctively. Mark. He took her hand, grounding himself in the warmth of her touch. That day, he continued, I told myself I had two choices. I could pretend everything was normal, or I could finally speak the truth I'd been avoiding. Emily wiped her cheeks, her voice trembling. And what truth was that? Mark drew in a steadying breath. That I missed you, he whispered. Not the routines, not the way things used to be. You, the person who laughed with me, talked with me, trusted me. His voice cracked slightly. I missed being someone you reached for. Emily pressed her hand against her mouth, her shoulders shaking with quiet emotion. Mark, I didn't know. I should have known, but I didn't. I was so caught up in my own exhaustion that I didn't see the toll it took on you. He shook his head gently. That's not blame, Emily. It's just the truth. It's my truth. The one I should have shared sooner. Emily rose from her seat, slightly not standing, but leaning closer, as if pulled by something she could no longer ignore. Mark, thank you, she whispered. Thank you for finally telling me. I didn't realize how much you'd been carrying alone. He gave a faint, bittersweet smile. We both carried things alone. Emily squeezed his hand, her voice breaking through the quiet with a raw honesty she'd kept buried for years. Then let's stop doing that, said. Let's stop hiding the parts of ourselves that need each other the most. For the first time in a long while. Mark felt something inside him soften, something that had been wound tight, waiting for release. This moment. These words was the turning point they had been walking toward without realizing it. Not dramatic in volume, but dramatic in truth. A marriage wasn't repaired by grand gestures. It was repaired by finally saying the things that should never have been left unsaid. And tonight, under soft lights and quiet rain, those truths were finally finding their way out. The rain had stopped completely by the time Mark and Emily stepped out of the restaurant. The air was cool, washed clean, carrying that gentle calm that follows a storm. Street lights reflected softly on the damp pavement, stretching golden lines that shimmered beneath their footsteps. For a while, they didn't speak. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had finally been said. And now they needed a moment simply to breathe in the truth of it. Emily folded her arms loosely, her expression thoughtful as she watched the clouds drift slowly across the night sky. You know, she said quietly, I didn't expect tonight to open so much. Mark glanced at her. Neither did I. She looked at him, then really looked tanned. There was something tender in her gaze that he hadn't seen in a long time. Thank you, she whispered. For being honest? For trusting me with that. I should have trusted you sooner, he replied gently. I think that's part of why we drifted. We were both trying so hard to protect each other from worry that we ended up creating more of it. Emily gave a soft, knowing smile. We kept choosing silence instead of truth. And tonight, Mark said, we finally chose truth. They walked the remaining distance to their car, stepped slow as if neither was quite ready for the evening to end. The night felt too meaningful to rush. When they reached the car, Mark opened the passenger door for her out of habit. But instead of getting in, Emily turned and rested her hand lightly on the doorframe. "Can we take a drive?" she asked. "Not home yet. Just somewhere." He nodded. "Anywhere you want." Few minutes later, they were driving down the quiet streets, the city slowly falling behind them. The world outside the windows was peaceful, soft neighborhoods, empty roads, trees swaying gently in the lingering breeze. Emily watched it pass, her head leaning slightly toward the window. After a while, she spoke again. "I've been thinking," she said, "about last spring, about the way I pulled away." She paused. "I didn't realize how much of myself I'd lost in that stress. I felt like I was drowning in expectations, and I thought shutting down would help me survive." Mark kept his eyes on the road, listening. "You don't have to explain everything, Emily." "I want to," she said softly, "because you deserved better than silence." He reached over and gently took her hand. "We both made mistakes. Let's not rewrite blame, let's rewrite the future." Emily's eyes softened. "I'd like that." They drove until the road opened onto a small overlook, a quiet hill that offered a view of the city lights shimmering far below. Mark parked the car and they stepped out into the cool air. The sky was clearing, dotted with faint stars peeking through the last wisps of cloud. Emily wrapped her arms around herself. Not from cold, but from the weight of the moment. "This place," she said, looking out across the lights, "reminds me of when we used to come here years ago. Before life got so serious." Mark stood beside her. "We always said we'd come back someday, and we never did." "Until now," he said gently. A wistful smile touched her lips. "Maybe that's the problem. We kept saving things for someday, time together, small moments, honest conversations. We always told ourselves we'd get to it later." He nodded slowly. "But later never came." Emily turned toward him. "Maybe it still can." Her voice wasn't dramatic, loud, or desperate. It was something far stronger, steady, hopeful, and honest. The kind of voice that could rebuild something that once felt fragile. Mark felt something inside him expand with quiet relief. "I want that," he said. "I want us to choose each other intentionally. Not just because we're comfortable. Not just because it's habit. But because we want to." Emily stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the city below. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want to look at you the way I used to. And I want to let you see me, not the tired version of me who shuts down. The real me. The one who still loves our life, even when it gets hard." For a moment, they simply stood together, breathing in the night air and the quiet promise beginning to form between them. Emily spoke again, her voice barely above a breath. "You know what scared me most, Mark? It wasn't losing you. It was realizing I'd stopped showing up for you in the ways that mattered." She shook her head gently. "I don't ever want to drift that far again." Mark reached OU.